Hi everybody, today we're moving on with the next part of indexes, which is looking at an index for the particular share market. First of all, let's just remember that an index is an average representation of whether the value of a group of shares is going up or down. Initially, we considered a group of shares which an investor had, so they had part of the shares from this company, part from another company, part from two other companies, and then we combined all that to see whether over a week whether the value of that particular group of shares was going up or down. The group of shares we're going to consider now is the entire share market. In other words, all the shares on the share market. Because we want to know whether the share market, the average value of the shares in the share market is going up and down. And so we're going to consider as our group of shares every single share there is on the Australian share market. So we can just have the entire market. That's what we're going to be looking at. Now we could go through and complete the table below for every company in the share market. So I've started listing these in alphabetical order from A to Z. And I put these dots in to show you that, we could go through and have every company from the share market through to Zimplats. And here in the number of shares, note that I've got now the number of shares that the company actually has. That's why they're in billions. So this is all the company, all the shares that A1 Investments has, because we want to consider all the shares on the Australian share market. So when we have a company, we've got to consider all their shares. And so then their price, and then we can work out their market capitalization on the 17th and the 24th and find the difference by dividing them. We could go through and complete this table for every company in the share market and then create an index that way. But I think you don't have to think about it too long, and you'll realize that that is going to be too time consuming. That would be a huge effort. And at the end of the day, it's not really necessary, as we'll see. So how do major market indexes do it? Well, they do it by taking the most important companies. Now, a valid question is, well, how do we determine what the most important companies are? Well, the criteria for the most important is decided by different for different indexes, and is decided by what they want to focus on. So some indexes focus on certain things and some focus on other things, and so that will determine what their criteria for most important is. So we'll have a look at some examples below. So for example, the All Ords, they take the 500 top companies, and that's based solely on market capitalization. So market capitalization only determines who gets in the All Ords. So remember, market capitalization is the value of the shares of a company all up. So it's the number of shares multiplied by the price of the shares. So the big companies would be part of the All Ords. And the All Ords, the companies that the All Ords use, represent more than 98% of the total market capitalization of the actual share market. So if you take all the 500 companies and add up all their market capitalization, then you've got more than 98% of the value of all the shares on the share market. So it's not bad, because it's close to the value of all the shares on the share market. Another one that is kicking around that's quite popular is S&P 200. So that chooses 200 good investment companies, so ones that you would want to invest in and that would be trending upwards over a long period of time. And they also have to have reasonable liquidity. So reasonable liquidity means that, well, first of all, liquidity is how easily you can convert your shares into money. So it's basically how popular that share is. So if the share is fairly popular, then you'll be able to sell it off pretty easily and convert your shares into money. So reasonable liquidity means that a large volume of shares is being traded, so it's fairly popular. So the price changes fairly rapidly. And so that keeps the index similar to the share market, so it's able to track these changes in the share market. And it's easier to see that by a company, by comparing it with a company that would have poor liquidity. So if it had poor liquidity, if there was little interest in it, then there would be little trading going on, and the share price would be staying the same even if there was a change in the entire market. So you want ones with reasonable liquidity, so when the market changes, then the prices will be changing to reflect that, and then that can be included in the index. So good investment companies also mean that this index is a good, or tells us when or when not to trade. So it's a good indication on when or when not to trade. It also has a low turnover. So with these criteria of reasonable liquidity and good investment, sometimes companies take a downturn and no longer are a good investment, or no longer have reasonable liquidity, so they have to be dropped out of the index, and so then they have to pick up another one that's better. So they'll always have 200 companies, but they might be picking up and dropping out. A low turnover means that they're not doing that very much, so they're not dropping out companies and picking up companies very much. So they do not take on different companies regularly. So there's a stability about the index, which means it's valid to compare from one time to the next. So there are also S&P 20, S&P 50, S&P 100 and 300. These numbers mean how many companies they have actually used to form the index. So they're all similar to S&P 200 as they're focused on trade and liquidity. For a small number of companies, so for example such as the S&P 20 and S&P 50, then a change in the prices is going to result in a greater increase or decrease. So if you think about it, if you don't have as many companies, then changes in the price of one company is going to affect the overall index more compared to, say, 300, S&P 300. So moving on, there are a number of different sectors within the market, as you should know by now from your investigation, and they're listed here, and for each sector they have an index, and the index for each one is found by taking a representative amount of companies from that particular sector. Which is then used to form the index. So we can have sector indexes, or we can have indexes for the entire market. So we now want to think about, well, having all these indexes, how can we compare with the All Ords? So we can compare the All Ords with other international indexes, or we can compare the All Ords with sector indexes within the Australian market, or we can use the All Ords and compare it to company share prices, and that's companies within the Australian share market. So all these are useful, but if you think about all these indexes, they're going to have different values, so they may not have the same base price of 500. So another international index may have had a base price of 1,000, or a sector index may have had a base price of 200, and so they're going to all be at vastly different values, especially company share prices. So company share prices, for example, a good company share price might be $30, but that's nowhere near 500, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a lot worse, or it's not performing very well. So all have different values, and sometimes vastly different values. So we have to use percentage change to compare them. And if you think about it, that's the main thing. So the most important thing about an index is how is it changing. So we want to think about percentage change to be able to compare these indexes. So here we have a graph of the All Ords, which is the blue one, and then this one, which is the US one, which is the red one. Now both start as having 0% change because your percentage change across the entire chart is compared to this value at January 2004. So we take this index value, and then as your index changes, we're always comparing back to this value here. So here we have 0%, and then you can see the All Ords is increasing in its percentage change as we go on. So all the index values, to create percentage change, all index values are compared back to this particular point at this time. So just to formalize that, we just say both start at 0% change as it's compared to the index at this time. Now we have certain key terms that we need to use when we're comparing indexes with each other. So if we have a volatile index, so if we're comparing it with the All Ords and we say it's volatile, that means it has a lot more peaks and troughs than the All Ords. A higher growth rate means that the line is basically just grows above the All Ords, so it's going above the All Ords. The All Ords is staying lower, but this one's going above it. And then to help you understand what these terms actually mean, here is a graph which is both volatile and a higher growth rate. So the grey is the All Ords and the blue is our sector or our company or whatever we want it to be. So you'll notice that it's growing above the All Ords, but it's also going up and down a lot more. So it's both volatile and has a higher growth rate. Now if we use the word underperforming, that can only be used when we're comparing a company or a sector. Now the reason underperforming can only be used with a company or sector is underperforming means it's not doing as well as the entire Australian market. And so it's not valid to be talking about other international indexes as underperforming with the All Ords because they're not part of the All Ords. They're on an entirely different market. Pardon me. So underperforming can only be used if we've got a company from the Australian share market or a sector from the Australian share market. And what we're basically saying is this part of our Australian market isn't doing as well as the entire Australian market. So it's below the All Ords. Our line of percentage change is below the All Ords. If we have a similar pattern to the All Ords, this doesn't necessarily mean that the lines are close, but it means that they're going up and down together. So they're kind of reflecting each other. So one's going up or down together. Or one, we can have a similar pattern, but one line could be lagging the other, which means they go up and down later. So one's going up or down later than the other one. So again, I've got a graph to demonstrate what we mean. So here we can see that a very similar pattern is occurring. They're both doing pretty much exactly the same thing at the same time, but they're not exactly the same values. So here they both go up, then they both go down, then they go steadily up for a time, then change slightly and drop off a little bit. This is an exaggerated version of what underperforming and a similar pattern would be. And please note that this is again an exaggerated version to help you understand. So the last one is mirroring. So we might have slight variations in our line, but on the whole, or mainly, they're exhibiting the same trends. So, and the lines are very close to the All Ords, or the line is very close to the All Ords. So our orange one is our market or company or sector or other international market. And they're very, very close together. This one's probably a little bit more up and down, so perhaps a little bit more volatile than the All Ords, but they're hugging very close to each other. The orange is hugging very close to the blue, and you can see that, well, it goes up, goes down, and then consistently is going up, and then probably here it drops off a bit more. But the general trends are being mirrored by both, being mirrored by the orange line, or the general trend of the blue is being mirrored by the orange.